The 17th and 18th centuries marked the beginning of Britain's transformation from a powerful European kingdom into the greatest global empire the world had ever seen. What had started as scattered colonies along distant coastlines gradually evolved into a network of territories stretching across every inhabited continent. Britain's growing influence was not built by one event or one ruler. Instead, it emerged through naval supremacy, commercial innovation, military victories, and an expanding industrial economy. At the center of this remarkable expansion stood the Royal Navy. Unlike many European powers that relied primarily on large standing armies, Britain invested heavily in its fleet. Shipyards along the Thames and other major ports produced increasingly sophisticated warships capable of sailing across the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific. These vessels protected British trade routes, defended colonies, and challenged rival empires wherever they appeared. The sea became Britain's greatest advantage. As long as Britain controlled the oceans, it could transport troops, goods, and supplies almost anywhere in the world. This naval strength proved decisive during a series of conflicts against France, Spain, and the Netherlands. Among the most significant was the 7 Years' War between 1756 and 1763. Often described as the first true global war, it was fought across Europe, North America, the Caribbean, West Africa, and India. British victories dramatically expanded imperial influence. France lost much of its territory in North America. Britain gained Canada and strengthened its position in India. The balance of global power shifted decisively. India became one of Britain's most valuable possessions. Initially, British influence there had been exercised mainly through the East India Company, a private trading corporation established in 1600. The company arrived as merchants seeking spices, textiles, tea, and other valuable goods. Over time, however, commerce evolved into political control. The company built fortified trading posts. It recruited local soldiers known as sepoys. It negotiated alliances with Indian rulers. When diplomacy failed, it fought wars. One of the turning points came at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Led by Robert Clive, company forces defeated the Nawab of Bengal with the support of local allies. The victory gave the company enormous influence over Bengal, one of India's richest regions. From there, British authority steadily expanded. During the following decades, the East India Company became far more than a commercial enterprise. It collected taxes, administered justice, maintained armies, negotiated treaties. In many respects, it governed millions of people. No private corporation in history had ever exercised such extraordinary political power. Yet company rule also generated resentment. Economic policies disrupted traditional industries. Heavy taxation affected many communities. Political interference weakened existing kingdoms. These tensions eventually erupted during the Indian Rebellion of 1857, sometimes called the Sepoy Mutiny or the First War of Independence, depending on historical perspective. The rebellion spread rapidly across northern India. Both British civilians and Indian soldiers suffered immense losses. After suppressing the uprising, the British government dissolved the East India Company's political authority. In 1858, India came under direct rule of the British Crown. Queen Victoria was later proclaimed Empress of India. The period became known as the British Raj. India became the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. Its vast population, agricultural production, strategic location, and economic importance made it central to Britain's global position. Railways expanded rapidly. Telegraph lines connected distant regions. Ports grew larger. Administrative systems became increasingly organized. However, British rule also remains controversial. While infrastructure developed, many Indians criticized political exclusion, economic inequality, and policies that often favored imperial interests over local needs. Meanwhile, Britain expanded elsewhere. In Australia, British settlement began in 1788 with the arrival of the First Fleet. Originally established as a penal colony for transported convicts, Australia gradually developed into a network of growing settlements. Indigenous Aboriginal communities who had lived on the continent for tens of thousands of years experienced profound disruption, displacement, and violence as European settlement expanded. Across the Pacific, New Zealand entered the British Empire through the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. The treaty remains one of the most debated documents in New Zealand's history because English and Maori versions differed in important ways, leading to long-standing disagreements over sovereignty and land. In Africa, British influence increased dramatically during the 19th century. Control of the Cape Colony at the southern tip of Africa secured an important route to India before the opening of the Suez Canal. Later, discoveries of diamonds and gold intensified competition for territory. Britain also expanded into Egypt, Sudan, Nigeria, Kenya, Rhodesia, and numerous other regions. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 transformed global trade. Connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, it dramatically shortened the journey between Europe and Asia. Recognizing its strategic importance, Britain gradually established effective control over Egypt and the canal, protecting one of the empire's most vital maritime routes. By the late 19th century, Britain possessed colonies, protectorates, and territories on every inhabited continent. The phrase, "the empire on which the sun never sets," became widely associated with British power because daylight always shone somewhere within its vast domains. From Canada to South Africa, from India to Hong Kong, from Australia to the Caribbean, British influence reached nearly every corner of the globe. At the same time, another revolution strengthened Britain's position even further, the Industrial Revolution. Beginning in the late 18th century, Britain became the world's first industrialized nation. Steam engines powered factories, mechanized textile mills dramatically increased production, coal and iron industries expanded rapidly. Railways transformed transportation. Steamships replaced sailing vessels. Telegraphs accelerated communication across continents. Industrialization allowed Britain to manufacture goods more efficiently than many competitors. British textiles, machinery, and manufactured products reached markets worldwide. Raw materials flowed into Britain from its colonies. Finished products flowed outward again. Trade linked every part of the empire into an enormous economic network. London emerged as the world's leading financial center. British banks financed railways in South America, mining operations in Africa, infrastructure projects in Asia. Insurance companies, shipping firms, and commercial enterprises connected global markets as never before. English increasingly became the language of international commerce. The Royal Navy guaranteed much of this system's security. By maintaining command of major sea lanes, Britain protected merchant shipping and discouraged piracy. Its fleet also enabled rapid deployment of military forces whenever colonial conflicts emerged. Naval bases stretched from Gibraltar to Malta, from Aden to Singapore, creating a worldwide chain supporting imperial operations. Yet imperial expansion was not always peaceful. Many regions experienced conquest through warfare. Local populations often resisted British rule. Examples include conflicts with the Zulu Kingdom in southern Africa, the Mahdiist forces in Sudan, and the Boer republics during the Second Boer War. These wars demonstrated that maintaining such a vast empire required enormous military and financial resources. At home, many Britons viewed the empire with pride. School children learned about imperial achievements. Maps displayed vast areas colored red, representing British territories. Newspapers celebrated explorers, soldiers, and colonial administrators. To supporters, the empire represented civilization, commerce, and progress. Critics, however, argued that imperialism frequently involved exploitation, racial inequality, economic domination, and suppression of local cultures. These debates continue among historians today. By the dawn of the 20th century, Britain ruled approximately 1/4 of the Earth's land surface and governed around 400 million people, roughly 1/4 of the world's population at the time.
Never before had one nation exercised such extensive global influence. Yet, beneath this extraordinary success, new challenges were emerging. Germany's growing industrial strength, America's expanding economy, Japan's modernization, nationalist movements within the colonies. These developments would soon reshape the international balance of power. Within only a few decades, two devastating world wars would transform the British Empire forever, beginning its long transition from the world's greatest imperial power to a modern constitutional nation whose influence would continue in very different ways.
The opening years of the 20th century marked both the greatest extent of the British Empire and the beginning of its gradual decline. In 1914, Britain ruled nearly 1/4 of the world's land and governed hundreds of millions of people across every inhabited continent. London was the financial capital of the world. The Royal Navy dominated the seas, and the British pound was the leading global currency. To many observers, the empire appeared unshakable. But history was about to take a dramatic turn. On July 28, 1914, the First World War began. What many expected to be a short European conflict quickly expanded into a global war because Britain and its colonies stretched across the world. When Britain declared war on Germany, millions of soldiers from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and other parts of the empire joined the fight. Indian soldiers served in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Australian and New Zealand forces became famous during the Gallipoli campaign. Canadian troops earned international respect at battles such as Vimy Ridge. The empire fought as one enormous military alliance. After 4 years of devastating combat, the Allies emerged victorious in 1918. Britain appeared to have strengthened its position. Former German and Ottoman territories were placed under British administration through League of Nations mandates. Yet victory came at an enormous cost. Nearly an entire generation had been affected by the war. The British economy carried heavy debts. Industries struggled to recover. Families across the empire mourned millions of casualties. More importantly, the war changed political thinking. Colonial soldiers had fought and died beside British troops. Many returned home asking an important question. If we fought for freedom in Europe, why should we remain without full self-government? Nationalist movements gained strength. In Ireland, demands for independence intensified. Following years of conflict, most of Ireland became the Irish Free State in 1922, while Northern Ireland remained part of the United Kingdom. Elsewhere, leaders across Asia and Africa increasingly called for political reform. Nowhere was this movement more powerful than in India. A lawyer named Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, later known as Mahatma Gandhi, introduced a revolutionary approach to resistance. Rather than advocating violent rebellion, Gandhi promoted nonviolent civil disobedience, boycotts, peaceful marches, refusal to cooperate with unjust laws. His philosophy inspired millions. Campaigns such as the Salt March of 1930 demonstrated that ordinary people could challenge imperial authority without taking up arms. British officials often responded with arrests and restrictions, but the independence movement continued to grow. Meanwhile, another global crisis emerged. The Great Depression of the 1930s weakened economies around the world. Britain experienced unemployment, declining trade, and financial hardship. The empire remained vast, but maintaining it became increasingly expensive. Then came an even greater challenge. In 1939, the Second World War began. Once again, Britain found itself fighting for survival. After the fall of France in 1940, Britain stood almost alone against Nazi Germany in Western Europe. The Battle of Britain became one of history's most important air campaigns. Royal Air Force pilots successfully defended Britain from the German Luftwaffe, preventing a planned invasion. Prime Minister Churchill inspired the nation with speeches emphasizing courage, determination, and resilience. Although Britain ultimately emerged among the victorious Allied powers in 1945, the war fundamentally changed the international balance of power.
The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's two dominant superpowers. Britain remained influential, but could no longer sustain its enormous empire in the same way. Economic exhaustion, war debts, changing international attitudes toward colonialism, growing nationalist movements, all combined to accelerate decolonization. The most significant moment came in 1947. After decades of political struggle, negotiations, and public pressure, India gained independence. The British Raj officially ended. However, independence also brought the partition of India, creating the separate nations of India and Pakistan. The partition triggered one of the largest migrations in human history. Millions crossed newly established borders. Communal violence claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. For Britain, the loss of India marked the symbolic beginning of the end of the imperial age. Other colonies soon followed. Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, gained independence in 1948. Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African colony to gain independence in 1957. Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Malaysia, Cyprus, and many others followed during the following decades. Each country experienced its own unique path towards self-government. Some transitions were relatively peaceful, others involved prolonged conflict. One event clearly demonstrated Britain's changing position in world affairs: the Suez Crisis of 1956.
After Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, Britain, France, and Israel launched the military operation. Although their forces achieved initial military success, strong opposition from both the United States and the Soviet Union forced Britain to withdraw. The crisis revealed a new reality. Britain could no longer act as an independent global superpower without the support of its allies. The imperial era was ending. Rather than attempting to preserve direct colonial rule, Britain gradually developed a different relationship with many former colonies. This became the Commonwealth of Nations. Instead of an empire governed from London, the Commonwealth became a voluntary association of independent countries cooperating in areas such as education, trade, diplomacy, sports, and development. Today, dozens of sovereign nations remain members. Even after decolonization, Britain's global influence did not disappear. The English language became the world's dominant international language. British legal traditions influenced courts across numerous countries. Parliamentary democracy inspired governments around the globe. Universities such as Oxford and Cambridge remained among the world's most respected institutions. London continued serving as one of the world's leading financial centers. British literature, music, science, technology, and culture reached global audiences. The empire itself had vanished, but many of its institutions endured. Historians continue debating the legacy of the British Empire. Supporters point to developments such as railways, legal systems, educational institutions, modern administration, scientific exchange, and global trade networks established during British rule. Critics emphasize colonial exploitation, economic inequality, cultural suppression, racial discrimination, famines under colonial administrations, and the lasting consequences of imperial rule in many regions. Both perspectives remain central to historical discussion. The story of the British Empire is therefore neither one of simple triumph nor simple failure. It is a story of extraordinary expansion, remarkable technological progress, immense military power, and worldwide influence. It is also a story of resistance, independence movements, political change, and the determination of millions who sought the right to govern themselves. At its height, Britain ruled the largest empire in human history. Its ships crossed every ocean. Its merchants traded on every continent. Its laws, language, and institutions reached hundreds of millions of people. Although the empire eventually dissolved, its legacy continues to shape international politics, economics, law, culture, and diplomacy in the 21st century. More than a century after Britain stood at the height of its imperial power, historians continue to study its achievements, its failures, and its lasting impact on the modern world.
The rise and fall of the British Empire remains one of history's greatest stories, a reminder that even the most powerful empires are not permanent, but the influence they leave behind can endure for generations.
It is difficult to overstate the scale of the British Empire at its height. By the early 20th century, it stretched across every inhabited continent, covering nearly 35 million square kilometers and governing around 400 million people, roughly 1/4 of the world's population at the time. From the icy landscapes of Canada to the tropical forests of Africa, from the busy ports of India to the distant shores of Australia, Britain's influence reached farther than any empire before it. This global network transformed the world in ways that are still visible today. The English language spread across continents and gradually became the dominant language of international business, science, aviation, diplomacy, and higher education. Countries with very different cultures and histories continued using English as an official or widely spoken language long after independence. British legal traditions also left a lasting mark. Many former colonies adopted legal systems based on English common law, while parliamentary democracy became a model for governments across the world. Institutions such as independent courts, elected legislatures, and civil services were shaped, in part, by British political traditions. Trade connected distant regions more closely than ever before. Steamships, railways, telegraph cables, and later undersea communication networks allowed goods, information, and people to move faster than in previous centuries. Global commerce expanded rapidly, helping create the interconnected world that exists today. Yet these achievements came alongside profound human costs. In many colonies, local economies were reorganized primarily to serve imperial interests. Valuable raw materials, including cotton, tea, rubber, spices, gold, and minerals, flowed to Britain, while manufactured goods were exported back to colonial markets. Many traditional industries declined. Local political authority was often weakened. Communities lost control over land and resources. Resistance movements were frequently met with military force. Across different parts of the empire, wars, uprisings, and political repression left lasting scars. Historians continue to study the impact of colonial policies during periods of famine and economic crisis. These subjects remain complex and are actively debated, but they form an important part of understanding the empire's full legacy. As former colonies achieved independence throughout the 20th century, they faced the enormous challenge of building new nations. Some experienced relatively peaceful transitions. Others endured civil wars, border disputes, or political instability. Even so, independence movements reshaped the international order. By the late 20th century, the age of European colonial empires had largely come to an end. Britain adapted to this new reality. Rather than ruling overseas territories directly, it strengthened diplomatic partnerships through the Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary association of independent countries that cooperate on education, trade, development, culture, and sport. Today, the Commonwealth includes nations from Africa, Asia, Europe, the Americas, and the Pacific. Although each member is fully sovereign, they continue to share historical ties and collaborate on many international issues. Modern Britain itself has also changed dramatically. It is now a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary democracy, one of the world's largest financial centers, and an influential voice in international organizations such as the United Nations, NATO, and the G7. London remains a global center for finance, education, technology, media, and culture. British universities attract students from around the world. British literature, music, cinema, and scientific research continue to influence global culture. The legacy of the empire is therefore both visible and debated. For some, it represents advances in global trade, infrastructure, legal institutions, and scientific exchange. For others, it is remembered through the experiences of colonial rule, inequality, exploitation, and struggles for independence. Both perspectives are essential to understanding this extraordinary period of history. The British Empire was never a single, uniform experience. Life under British rule differed greatly between Canada, India, Australia, Nigeria, Jamaica, Hong Kong, Egypt, and countless other territories. Each region experienced its own unique relationship with the empire, shaped by local cultures, politics, and historical circumstances. This complexity explains why the British Empire remains one of the most widely studied subjects in world history. Its story is not simply about conquest. It is about exploration, trade, innovation, conflict, migration, resistance, power, and change. Perhaps the empire's greatest legacy is not the territory it once controlled, but the lasting connections it created across continents, languages, legal systems, educational institutions, railways, ports, sports such as cricket and rugby, political ideas, cultural exchanges. These continue to shape everyday life for billions of people. History reminds us that no empire lasts forever. Ancient Rome fell. The Mongol Empire fragmented. The Ottoman Empire disappeared. The British Empire followed the same historical pattern. Its political control faded, but its influence endured. Today, more than a century after the British stood at the height of global power, historians continue to examine both its remarkable achievements and its painful consequences. Understanding the British Empire requires acknowledging both. It connected distant parts of the world like never before. Yet, it also transformed societies in ways that many people continue to debate and experience. From a small island kingdom on the edge of Europe, Britain built the largest empire in history. Its ships crossed every ocean. Its merchants traded in every major port. Its language became global. Its institutions influenced governments around the world. And although the empire itself has vanished, its legacy continues to shape international politics, economics, culture, and society in the 21st century. The rise and fall of the British Empire remains one of history's greatest stories, a powerful reminder that even the mightiest empires are temporary, but the changes they bring can echo across centuries.